So can people hear me? Okay. I'm guessing some people did go to their team room and they're doing their team planning right now, and I'm sure people need a break. But I'm just going to start, and don't ever hesitate to leave, certainly, while I'm speaking, and please don't hesitate to ask questions while I'm speaking. I appreciate that. I'd like to thank you for having me. I'd like to especially thank Stephanie Strayer, who got me here. I want to apologize at the outset. I actually am recovering from a herniated disc, and it's my first herniated disc, and I'm still kind of new to sciatic pain. I don't know, raise your hands if you know what sciatic pain is like. Good, okay. And I can't really stop moving. If I stand or sit, I think the disc will like explode or something. So I'm gonna just keep moving. I'm like that bus in the movie Speed. And I hope that isn't distracting, and hopefully it'll still make the presentation worthwhile, but might make it a little disjointed in some places. I work for an agency called the Center for Family Representation in New York City. We represent parents in child protective dependency proceedings as well as termination of parental rights proceedings. And I've been the deputy director there since it was founded in 2002. It's still a relatively new agency. We're 8 years old, just about, and we work with 530 or so families, new families every year, and have about 1,500 active cases at any given time. But prior to 2002, I worked for most of the previous 19 years as an attorney representing children at the juvenile rights practice of the Legal Aid Society, where I ran the Manhattan Trial Office and was there for a few years. And I also, for 5 years, represented foster care agencies. So I have worn a lot of hats in the system and really decided to represent parents and to try to represent parents differently, because if you work with children long enough, they grow up and they often end up very much like some of our young panelists. I didn't think foster care was necessarily helping a lot of kids, and the overwhelming majority of my young clients actually wanted to go home. They wanted their parents to get better if they were in foster care, but they wanted to go home. And so I joined some other people, most of whom had worked for like CASA and foster care agencies and had been representing children. And thanks to Sue Jacobs, who's the executive director who wrote the first grant, as she raised more money, she pulled us all in. And we decided to do this a little bit differently. Just show of hands, how many people in the room are judges or work for the court system? Is that almost everyone, or? And how many people represent, are advocates, represent children? And how many represent parents? And some of you represent both? Any of you represent both? Okay. And are there agency attorneys as well? Okay, so a good cross-section. This approach, Cornerstone Advocacy, is something that we have developed over the last several years. We have been to a lot of places talking about it, as far as Alaska, Colorado, Michigan, and most of the time, actually, though we work with parents, we are usually brought out by advocates for children. And I hope that I will be persuasive in convincing you that no matter what hat you wear, this approach may have something of value in it. But at the same time, I am not foolish, and I know that I really know very little about Pennsylvania practice. And so I realize that some of the things I may say may not really apply. I'm going to do my best to make sure that I'm talking in the most general way. And I would imagine that the one thing we do have in common, though, is that we don't have enough resources. We are too busy. If we had our way, we'd work with 10 cases at a time. So hopefully I'm going to give you some practical tips, even in the context of limited resources, which I think in the public sector is just something we will live with forever and ever. We developed this approach because we decided at the Center for Family Representation, CFR, that the most important question we had to answer on every single case was whether or not this parent would be able to parent this child safely, or his or her children safely. I know that in court improvement projects, and I sit on lots of task forces in New York State and do work on committees and all of that, there's a lot of focus on, you know, best practices and good outcomes and things like that. And, you know, I'm as big a fan of task forces as everybody else, but I think that sometimes we get very, very focused on timelines and outcomes that are related to operations and checklists, and are we getting to adjudication on time, and things like that. And I will tell you that at CFR we have found that some of those operational measures do not help us answer the question of whether a parent can parent safely. And so we've developed this approach, and we've tried to maintain a sense of urgency around it. And while it is about front-loading, it's an approach that we take all the way through the life of a case. So I know you have a PowerPoint, and I know the temptation is to read ahead, but I'm going to ask you not to do it. So Cornerstone advocacy, okay? On every case, if children go into foster care, we focus on 4 things. And what you'll notice right away is we don't focus on time to adjudication, we don't focus on time to disposition, and we don't focus necessarily on anything that is related to due process. But I assure you that our attorneys are very, very rigorous about due process. And I hope I'm going to show you how they bring some of that to bear with respect to these 4 areas. And I'm going to talk about each of them in a little more depth. So we want to see visiting arrangements that allow parents and their children to see each other as often as possible, for as long as possible, with as little agency oversight as is needed, and that visits are organized around activities that mimic family life. If children have to go into foster care placement, we want to see that the placement, if possible, supports that child's connection to the parent and supports that family's connection to the friends, the churches, the institutions, the daycare centers, anything that they were involved in prior to being separated by foster care. We look to see services be strength-based, and I'm sure that's like not new at all, because we're all into strength-based services. I saw, like, you know, all the stuff outside, and somebody had painted something. I'm sure something like this had to do with strength-based. I'm sure you had some exercise or icebreaker you had to work on with these. I'm fascinated to have somebody tell me what this was all about. And that may sound like a no-brainer, but I'm going to tell you what we do that might be a little bit different. I'm sorry that I have to keep walking, but I'm going to have to keep walking. Conferences, okay? We try to leverage every out-of-court opportunity we can to move the case along, okay? And like I say, I'm going to talk more about these. Now, at CFR, we do an enormous amount of private fundraising, and we have some city and state contracts. We are like the public defender in Manhattan, but we do a lot of private fundraising because we have an attorney and a social worker on every single case. And we also have parent advocates. Our parent advocates are parents who have actually had the experience of having their children removed from foster care, have overcome whatever issues led to that removal, and are now parenting their children safely, and they are part of our professional staff as well. They play a very, very critical role, and I'm telling you that up front because I know right away some of the reaction is going to be, well, you know, sure, you can focus on all these things when you have that kind of model. And as I said, I'm hoping that I'm going to convince you that you can pull some of this model even without those resources. I never practiced with those resources before. I've always had a high volume practice, and much of this approach originated in some of the work that I did with children's attorneys early on. But because of that, because I know not everybody has the same model as CFR, I am going to ask you all to be thinking with me, and when you break out into your team rooms or your team planning sessions or whatever it's called, to think about small adjustments that you can make in your practice to try to bring some of these cornerstones to bear if you are persuaded that it's worth doing that. I know there's probably all sorts of organizers here, and I know not everybody can read this, but I am going to keep track of the small adjustments up here, and I'm going to ask someone, Stephanie, I don't know who it will be, to write them up later and email them to people. Is that possible? Yes? Stephanie says it's possible. Okay. So I'm going to ask somebody to pay attention to that. And the reason I call them small adjustments is because I can't stand going to any kind of training or presentation where somebody presents some sweeping vision that I know is completely unrealistic for the context in which I practice. So some things I'm going to suggest might be unrealistic to you, but not others. And hopefully these small adjustments are going to be something that you could realistically do. Some of them are about attitude, some of them are about language, some of them are about things like learning, as concrete as learning a regulation. Okay. At CFR, as I said, since we've been in existence since 2002, doing direct representations since 2004, and since 2007 we have had a high volume practice. We think that the results in terms of time to reunification are pretty good. Right now, I just did our median length of stay. For those of you who know data or are data driven, you know that a median is always going to be better than a mean. But our median length of stay right now is 57 days for our clients whose children are in foster care, and that compares to a citywide average of 11 and a half months. Okay, that's the city's median. That's what they report as their best. Now the city's median has come down a little bit. We like to think it had something to do with us, but even if it didn't, even if it's down to 9 months, 8 months, or whatever, we're still doing pretty good when it comes to a median. And our average, okay, is 4 months. That's the average for all of our clients' children who are in foster care. And in our state, that compares to 29 months as an average. So we think we're doing pretty good. When we started in Manhattan doing a high volume practice, the dismissal rate was 11%. Last year, 33% of our cases were dismissed. And many of those dismissals, though we get a lot of cases dismissed on the merits, I'm sorry, I haven't even been looking over here. Many of these dismissals are the kinds of dismissals, we call them ACDs, where the court determines that there really isn't any need for certain services, that the aid of the court is no longer required. The parent leaves the court process without even a finding of neglect, which matters a lot to us because I don't know about this in Pennsylvania, but in New York, a finding of neglect can preclude a lot of parents from pursuing employment in certain areas. Notably anything to do with children. Okay, the person who introduced me, and I'm so sorry I have already forgotten your name, it must be the painkillers, but in any event, said that we front load, okay? Why did we pick Cornerstone Advocacy and why did we pick 60 days, okay? I know it already sounds a little kitschy to some people, and believe me, sometimes it sounds a little kitschy to me, but we picked it not only because we really believe these 4 areas are the cornerstone, the foundation to getting kids home quickly, not only because we believe these 4 foundations are how we best answer the question of who can parent safely and who can't, but because in legal services, we know we're going to have a lot of new staff. They're going to be staff right out of law school, staff right out of social work school, and frankly, we wanted something that was going to be easy for them to remember. And we picked 60 days because we wanted that to be something that was in staff's mind all the time, that I've got to start working on this stuff all the time. We also picked 60 days because it is a number that is linked in terms of national best practices to time to adjudication. And in some jurisdictions, some judges I know are more comfortable with sending kids home after an adjudication. I am happy to say that in our jurisdiction, we have managed to separate adjudication from kids coming home because our average time to adjudication in New York City ranges from 6 months to 11 months. So if we had to wait for adjudication, a lot of kids would stay in care a lot longer than they need to. And mostly to take advantage of people's sense of urgency at the beginning of the case. Every child comes into care with a goal of return to parent. When the family is first in crisis, there's often a lot of people around, and as you're going to see, we try to access a lot of those people to be involved with supporting the family. But we do work on it no matter when, and no matter how old the case is, and we keep working on the cornerstones. Okay, placement. This probably sounds like a no-brainer, and maybe it is, but we look very hard beyond the first relative even identified by the department for someone who is really going to be supportive of that child during the separation and who is supportive of the parent-child relationship where that's appropriate. That means that we don't just look at relatives. We look at godparents, We ask parents about other people that they're close to. Some cases is great, and some cases not so great. We recently worked on a case where our client was arrested for stabbing her abuser in his sleep. This happened while their young child, under the age of 2, was asleep in another room. Those charges against her actually ended up being dropped, but when the child first came into care, where did the department put the child? With her mother, okay? And it was hard. Her mother didn't like the fact that she'd gotten herself into this, didn't like the fact that she had been involved with this guy. All sorts of things started to deteriorate in the case. Visits weren't going well. Our client was ready to walk. I don't want to do services, the whole thing. And we said to our client, okay, well, who would you feel supported by? And she asked whether we could go into court and ask the judge to place her child with the abuser's relatives, okay? This was not intuitive to us at all. And when staff first came to their supervisors about it, I can assure you that some of the supervisors, we're all for client empowerment, but this is a bad idea. And how are we going to go into court with a straight face and ask for this? But we managed to go into court with a straight face. The department objected for reasons that sounded incredibly rational to us as well. But lo and behold, the judge went along with it. Our client articulated the reasons why under oath, and the whole case turned around after that. The paternal relatives let her visit in the home, let her be there for nap time, let her be there for bath time, let her be there for meal time. They totally got what had been going on. They were not crazy about some of the things that their son had done, but they were very, very supportive of our client, and so these people are not necessarily who we'd pick in the case. I think some of the things that are up there are clear, but parents do, not every parent, but parents are anxious when their children are in care. They do worry. They do wonder. They are sad. And that anxiety, which often translates into a lot of anger, can really get in the way of parents engaging in the services that they need to engage in. And so if the placement is one that really supports the parent and the child, that helps the parent stay engaged. If you don't have to disrupt everything for a child, if you can keep the child in the same daycare, keep the child in the same school, keep the child in the same early intervention, keep the child involved with his or her friends, that also is something that is not only good for a child, but is good for the parent. And often there's people in the community that have been very involved with the family. They may have even called in the report, and they don't necessarily want to stop being involved with the child, stop being involved with the family, and they can help the parent while they're separated and be another support to the parent. So many cases I worked on when I represented children, and then after that, and when I represented agency, where who called in the reports? Somebody at the school. And after the report got called in, the person at the school said, well, I never wanted the child to be removed from the school. I never wanted that to happen. But that's what happens, right? You can't always keep a child in the school. I know in the state of Pennsylvania, you have got, and I'm going to get to this, you've got some great regulations. You've got some great bulletins that have come out of the Office of Children, Youth, and Families. And you already have a policy statement that makes clear that a placement is supposed to take into account proximity to school, proximity to parents in order to encourage visiting, and any known medical, psychological, et cetera needs. And I would really pay attention to that, et cetera, and say it's important for kids to stay involved with their teams. It's important for them to stay involved with their churches. It's important for them to at least get to see the same people in terms of their friends and things that they got to see before. I know it doesn't always work, okay? And the only small adjustment I want to suggest on this is just to ask, no matter who you get to talk to first. If you represent the department, it's a caseworker. If you represent a parent, it's a parent. And if you represent an older child, it's an older child. Who else might be available to be a support to you? And not to stop at the first person identified by the department. I'm not assuming that every caseworker stops at the first relative, but I know caseworkers. I used to represent them for 5 years. They're very overwhelmed. They have a lot to do. Every time they turn around, the law wants them to extend their search even further, and it gets tiring. So just to ask who else, okay, we had a case with an autistic client. Of course, It was alleged that she was mentally ill. She wasn't mentally ill. And that case also unraveled until her neighbor agreed to take the children so that she could see the children every day. So, you know, who else? Who else has a significant positive relationship? When you're looking at a petition for the first time, sometimes this should jump out at you. Who else might have a relationship? Parents live often in urban settings at least, large apartment buildings. Who else in that apartment building might be a resource for the child? And I know there's worries all the time about, you know, the parent not having too much access to the child and knowing where the child is and things like that. And it is inappropriate for every case, but let's not just stop at relatives, and let's ask ourselves, what was the constellation of things that this family was involved in? And just ask. And it doesn't have to take long to ask. And, you know, I don't know about people in the Pennsylvania court system, but in New York City, we sit and wait in court a long time sometimes. And when we get a new petition, what we say to the attorneys is, while you're sitting there, before you get the chance to meet your client, look at the allegations and ask yourself, look at the age of the child. What else might this child have been involved with? Okay, if they're 3, did they go to a Head Start program? If they're 6, they were in a school. Start to make your list and start to ask about it. Okay, services, all right? Again, really obvious what's up there. This is a very common sense approach, okay? Inappropriate services that are formulaic, that are duplicative, that don't make sense for the parents are probably not going to be the kinds of services that parents, A, stay engaged with, and if they stay engaged, they're not going to help, usually, okay? 17% of our clients are under the age of 25. When there is a drug allegation against one of those young parents, 18, 19, 20, they are typically sent by the department to the same drug treatment program that people who are much, much older, you know, like my age, much, much older, are sent to. And they tell us again and again, I don't want to go there. You know, I'm using marijuana, and everybody here has used meth and coke and crack. I'm 20, and everybody in this room has had like 7 children, and I can't relate to them. And so sometimes it's like that. Corporal punishment cases. What happens in Pennsylvania when a parent is charged with corporal punishment? What are they referred to usually? Say it louder, someone. Anger management. What else? Parenting skills. What else? Domestic violence counseling sometimes. Psychiatric evaluation, right? Sometimes individual counseling, as well as family counseling, right? And often they can't have more visits till they're engaged in family counseling, but they can't get into family counseling till they've done the PACEs in individual counseling, okay? All of those things, same thing happens to us on a lot of our cases. Corporal punishment case, you know, all this long list of services. And this is what we do. Our social work staff or our parent advocate staff usually are the ones to say to their counterparts at social services, or we say to the attorneys who are our counterparts, why do we need all these services? Why does she need to go to 5 places? Has anybody thought of, oh, I don't know, starting with individual therapy? Could we have the psychiatric or the psychological or the social work or the psychosocial done and then ask the therapist if she could address these things? And when we first started doing this, we got a lot of pushback, and we had to talk to therapists, and we had to ask them to send us letters, and we had to occasionally get them into court, but most of the time a letter would do it, and we'd say, hi, we have a client. Here's what the allegations are. Do you think, you know, she's alleged to have hit her 7-year-old excessively. Do you think that you could, while you're seeing the client, address parenting and anger management? And what do you think the response usually is? What else would I be talking with her about if I'm going to be trying to support her to get her kid back, okay? Now, of course, there's a whole lot of things that the therapist might talk to her about. On the flip side, a lot of our clients, and I think this goes with young people as well as parents, they don't want to go to therapy. They don't want to be mentally ill. They may have been told they had all sorts of diagnoses. I think young people who've lived in foster care often have had a few, and they are worried they're going to be given pills, and they don't want to be labeled that way. So in those kinds of cases, we're saying, you know, she's resistant. Let's talk to her about why she's resistant. Let's start with this instead, okay? Same thing in terms of not making sure that a parent has to go here, 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 and here, okay? I was amazed when I represented foster care agencies by how often the caseworker, well-intentioned, busy, caring, etc., would always make the same referral to the same program. And when I would say, why are you doing that? They would say, well, that's just, that's where we always made the referral. Or, well, we have somebody who used to work at this agency and now she's running a parenting skills program, so we make the referrals there. And a lot of times that might just be fine. But if we treat families formulaically, we're not going to answer that question of who can, of parent and who can't, okay? Strength-based services, okay? I know you've been hearing it as long as I've been hearing it, and I've been practicing 23 years, so I've been hearing strength-based, I guess, for about 10 of those years. The Annie E. Casey Foundation, who I love, they gave us a Cornerstone grant when we started. Family team conferencing, all this strength-based, okay? If you represent a caseworker, in your discussions with the caseworker, how often have you said to the caseworker, what are Ms. Jones' strengths? Right? Usually the conversation is, she has to do this, 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 okay? Just asking the question, what are the family's strengths, can change the whole discussion. I love it when a judge will ask that question of a caseworker, okay? I hear a lot of judges say, what's the service plan? Have you offered the mother services? Have you offered the father services, okay? Where's the child gonna go? Have you located a relative, okay? What are the parents' strengths? I know we're all steeped in it, but really asking that is important. We ask our own clients what they think their strengths are. And I know not every client is able to have that conversation, but we do. You can ask young people about what they think their parents' strengths are. You will be amazed at some of the things that you will hear, okay? I practiced during the crack epidemic. I don't know what it was like in Pennsylvania, but in New York City, we were probably getting, I don't know, hundreds of cases every week where the allegation was the baby tested positive for crack, okay? And then that was one group of petitions. And the other one was the mother left the child crying in the apartment after 6 hours, left the child alone, the baby, okay? And admitted to the caseworker that she left the baby alone after the baby had been crying for 6 hours because, she didn't want to do this, she didn't know what to do, et cetera, et cetera. When I used to see those petitions during the crack epidemic, I had never had my own children yet. I now have my own children, they're much older. And I remember thinking, I cannot believe somebody would leave a crying infant. And then I had crying infants. And then, you know what I started to think? Whoa, she lasted 6 hours before she left, okay? That's a strength, but that's not how it's going to be portrayed, okay? Some of our clients have been employed, some parents have been employed, some parents have maintained sobriety, okay, for long periods of time, okay? And we don't say to them, we say, prior history, prior findings. We don't often say to them, what worked for you? What worked? What worked? Okay? That's not usually what they're hearing. They're told what to do. They're not asked what worked. Okay? It's important to find that out. And no matter what you do and what hat you wear, and if you're a court attorney and you run conferences, or if you're a judge, or if you represent parents, children, caseworkers, you can ask the question. It takes 6 minutes of conversation, maybe not even. Maybe 1 minute of conversation. You can ask, what are the parents' strengths? Sometimes the parents' strengths are their extended family. Sometimes their strength is that they've maintained sobriety, okay? If you represent parents, you can ask them what has worked in the past. Sometimes it's a program in the church basement, and then you got to figure out, why did that work? Was it because there was other people there? Was it because there was food there? Okay? These are the kinds of things that our social work staff and our parent advocates are trying to get under all the time. Last little vignette I'll tell you about services. We represented a parent who was accused of being mentally ill, and she was accused of not disciplining her eldest child appropriately. She had 3 children. They were put into 3 different homes in 3 different boroughs. Her therapist was in one borough, her agency was in another borough, her kids were in 3 different boroughs, and she became homeless when her kids went into care because she lost her public housing. So then she was moved to a shelter. Okay, so she was traveling every day all over the place. And we went to court to try to consolidate her service plan and to ask for, we had already gotten 2 children home, to ask for one of the children to come home. We lost that hearing, so we went to the appellate division, because in New York State you can seek an interim stay, and you can go the very next day if you want to, or the same day. And there we were in front of the justice, and usually when we're at the appellate division, the arguments are very legal. They're not, about common sense. And so the justice turned to the agency attorney and said, now, what do you want this woman to do? And so she's got to go here, she's got to go here, she's got to go here, she's got to go here. Her therapist is in Queens, the baby is living in the Bronx, she is in Manhattan. We also want her to go to anger management, in our agency, blah, 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 blah. And the justice turned, heard from everybody, and then turned to the agency attorney and said, if she was not mentally ill before, then this will put her right over the edge. You've got to come up with something different. We look all the time, and I know this isn't relevant for everybody, but we look all the time for services that can be consolidated or done one at a time. We never want services to get in the way of employment, visiting, et cetera, et cetera. Duplication, ask yourself if all this stuff is necessary. I think it's amazing to stand up in court. If you're a parent's attorney, or if you're a judge, you could ask this, and we do this all the time. We're just asking what the department's assessment was with respect to this parenting skills program. Why is this parenting skills program a match for what are deemed to be my client's needs? Okay, what do you think the answer usually is? I think it's very powerful. Another small adjustment when it comes to parenting skills especially, and raise your hand if you've ever observed a parenting skills class. Okay, so I'm hoping you're going to join me in believing that not all of them are the best, or best suited for not every client, okay? But another small adjustment, just to ask, how did you choose this parenting program? Tell me, caseworker, Ms. or Mr. Caseworker, why you think this program is going to do it. And don't, because when the parent walks in with the certificate, they expect something's going to happen, and it doesn't always happen. Many of our judges, I don't know about the judges here, are incredibly cynical about parenting skills program, but we didn't have any success on getting those out of the service plan until we just started asking this simple question. We're just raising this. It isn't clear to us. We went to a conference and we don't understand it, okay? All right, conferences. I understand from a map that I got off the internet. Oh, is Kathy Utz here? Is Kathy here? Thank you. I should have thanked her at the beginning. Okay, a round of applause for Kathy. Because Kathy helped me navigate the Pennsylvania system. And is Cynthia Stoltz here? Cynthia? Oh, okay, and a round of applause for Cynthia, who tried like hell to help me, but we could never be on the phone at the same time. So I learned about a lot of your statutes and your regulations, and I'm going to go through them in a lot of detail, but at least as of August 2009, I understand that there were, oh, no, I'm not going to read the map right. Well, I want to say that there was like 49 counties participating in some kind of family group conferencing. Raise your hand if you have some kind of family team, family group. Hi. Okay. So, look, like I say, I am a huge fan of the Annie Casey Foundation. I am a huge fan of the conferencing model. I think when it's done well, it's really great for families. I actually got this off of the Pennsylvania Family Group decision-making website at the University of Pittsburgh, which I understand has driven some of the family team conferencing, and I got this, which I thought was fabulous. The guiding principle must be that this is a family-driven, professionally infused process. Family-driven, professionally infused. I mean, I'm always looking for like the slogan that will help people change their practice for the hat or the t-shirt or something, but Like, I so want to have this on a t-shirt, right? Family driven, professionally infused, okay? It sounds fabulous. Then I saw this also, okay? The Pennsylvania Family Group decision-making process is a strength-based empowerment model designed to join the wider family group, including relatives, friends, community members, and others, to collectively make decisions. Okay, those are two great value statements. But in New York City, and I don't know about Pennsylvania, I would add another value statement to that. I would add another principle, which is, I think this is a really good idea, but it is hard, unwieldy, time-consuming, draining, and on my best days, I am professionally ambivalent about it, because I remember the old days when you could just say to a parent, if you want your kids back, you have to get sober. Next, okay? This is hard. This conferencing stuff is sophisticated, it demands a lot of people, and it isn't always, I don't want to break this to people, but it isn't always something that the family experiences as a family-driven, professionally infused process. They sometimes experience it as having lots of checklists. They sometimes feel like they're being told what to do. They're often confused, okay? They often feel outnumbered in the room, all right? How many of you have a family group conferencing model that asks the facilitator to reference ASFA at the conference? Do you know? Oh, that's one of your small adjustments. You should find out. You should find this out, okay? About whether that, did somebody raise their hand? Did you? Philadelphia requires it. Is it part of every conference? First thing, okay, first thing a parent hears about at this family-driven process that is supposed to empower them is about the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And you know what they're told? If your kids are in care for 15 out of the most recent 22 months, we may have to terminate your rights. I mean, talk about empowering, right? If you've just lost your kids. So, okay, find that out, because that's important to know. And here's your small adjustment on this. We are very fortunate at CFR because we try to make sure that, especially in the beginning of the case, the parent has somebody at the conference with them, for all the reasons I said, because it can be a really, really great process. It doesn't get bogged down the way the court does. You don't necessarily have to wait and wait and wait. You don't have to deal with rules of evidence, blah, 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 blah. It can be great. But parents can feel overwhelmed, intimidated, and confused. Okay, so here's your small adjustment. It's not a big one. Ask the parent, if you're the judge or the caseworker, or you're representing the parent, is there anybody that you would feel supported by that you could bring to the conference? Is there anybody? Who would it be? Okay? Now, you're going to get pushback, okay? Because anytime we institute a new reform, fast behind it is checklists, timelines, protocols, right? Because we all want to be doing this consistently, and this is a best practice. And what would a best practice be without checklists and protocols and everything else, okay? And I'm not dissing checklists. I think that that helps people learn, and that gives structure, and people need it, because these are hard meetings to facilitate. But, you know, when you don't know the person that the parent's bringing, it can get unwieldy, and it could ruin your whole day if you're the caseworker facilitating that conference, okay? When we first started going to conferences, because our social workers are covered by the attorney-client privilege, the social work staff had to say, we're not talking about the allegations. We're not going to talk about the allegations unless our client wants to talk about the allegations. You know, and what they would say is, well, how can we talk about services if we don't talk about the allegations? And we say, we can talk about services. You know, our client isn't ready to do a mental health evaluation. You know, she is willing to go into a drug program. Let's talk about the drug program. Let's make this a family-driven, professionally infused process, okay? I saw the banner out there, one of them that said, families, you know, are in the best, and maybe one of these says it too, but I also don't have my glasses on, so I can't tell. Maybe one of these says that families are, you know, the experts on what they need. Another great principle, but very hard to operationalize. So if you want to operationalize it, that's just my suggestion, okay? To ask the parent, who do they feel supported by? Anybody who's ever had to go to a lot of doctor's appointments, I know the herniated disc people in the room and me, okay? This has happened to me over the last few weeks, and I had to go to all these appointments with my husband because I can't drive, and I could not believe how many times I left a physical therapist, a surgeon, a pain medicine, a orthopedist, and I would walk out and I could not remember like 3 of the answers to the questions that I asked. And then I started asking my husband to take notes because I just couldn't remember. And I couldn't remember because I was anxious, I was in pain. I kept hoping that somebody was going to say, here is a pill that will cure your herniated disc. And of course nobody does. Instead what I got was, well, it's a process. Well, you have to be patient. Well, there's no telling really what could happen. Almost everybody's better in a year, okay? And when you're going through any process like that, the reason they tell you to go to a doctor with somebody is because it makes it hard to focus. And it makes it hard for our clients to be at their best. And if they bring a support to conferences, that support might be able to take that parent out of the room when they're getting hostile and say, we're going to chill out, okay? That person might be able to ask questions that the parent has a hard time articulating. And that person might be able to say, you know what, my sister or my, member of my parish or my neighbor is just having a little bit of a hard time with this, okay? That person might know something. If the person knows something about the law, what we say to the parent is, you're going to hear about ASFA, okay? Don't worry. That's what has to be said, okay? When a parent is in these conferences alone, and I don't know if you're going to hear from any parents during this process, I hope you will, it doesn't exactly match up to our aspirations. And everybody, this is a small adjustment. Who can support the parent? Okay? Older youth, same thing. Who do you want in the room with you? Okay? You're angry with your mom. Who do you want with you? Is there somebody you want with you? All right? I will tell you that in the state of Pennsylvania, you all have made it very clear in your articulation of best practices that all of these people are supposed to be in the room, okay? The Pennsylvania Standards for Child Welfare Practice. I read a lot of those too, okay? The child welfare worker must work directly with and involve all family members as well as all others involved with the family. Is this bad? I mean, is this not the right place? You're not getting like the feedback? I'm just hearing that? That's probably the pain medication too. All right. Okay, has to work with all others involved with the family in a comprehensive family-focused assessment to determine the strengths and needs of the family. Okay? Page 13, page 15 of section 2, the caseworker is supposed to identify extended families or others who can support the child or be resources for the family. Okay? I promise you that there is not a conferencing model out there that doesn't tell you you're supposed to have everybody in the room, okay? Everybody who can be a support. A lot of times they're in the community. They're not always the usual suspects. If you ask, who will you feel supported by? Who will help you stay calm? Okay, that's good. Our attorneys used to have to, in court, routinely ask when the case was arraigned. It was one of our standard Cornerstone applications. We used to say, we're asking that Ms. So-and-so be allowed to accompany our client to conferences. And at first the judge was like, I don't get involved with that. Take it outside, that's social work. I don't do that, And so we had to argue about why it was important. Now we don't have to make that argument so often, okay? Now our social workers go out and talk to the caseworker, say, here's my card, okay, I want to be invited. If we can't get somebody to the conference, then we ask the parent, who do you want there? And then we will probably make that application on the record. Okay. Visiting. This is the cornerstone that I am the most obsessed with. I'm like super obsessed with this cornerstone. I think it is the heart and the driver of all the other cornerstones, and you're probably already seeing that they're all related to one another, and one of them can undermine all the rest. And the one that can undermine all the rest and also propel all the rest is visiting, okay? What's the legal standard in Pennsylvania? I actually know what it is because I read the regulation that Kathy pointed me to. What's the legal standard? An hour every 14 days. How many hours a year is that? Okay, we should have been faster with that. Okay, 27? 26 or 26 and a half, not to split hairs, okay? All right, 20, I'll make it 27. 27 hours a year. Congratulations, your children have been removed, but don't worry, because we're going to give you a little more than a day to stay bonded and attached. And not only do we want you to stay attached in that one day a year that we're going to give you, but we also want you to improve your relationship during that time. You know, we want you to heal things. We want you to overcome things, okay? That's your legal standard. I know that isn't necessarily what the practice is in places. I read the visiting handbook, the visitation handbook. I know it's dated from 1999, and I know that weekly is encouraged. Yes? And there's so few struggles as a parent's attorney. Reward. Right. Right. So child-focused, right? So child-focused, okay? Because, you know, when we say that, we're also saying to the child, okay, I know you're confused. I know you might be living with strangers. I know you're sad. I know that a lot has changed since you opened your mouth and said something was happening in your house. But don't worry, because for one day this year, you're going to get to see your mom, okay? One day. And in a good, you know, when we're really doing best practices, it might amount to 2 days a year, or 3 days a year, all right? That notion that visiting is a reward is, I think, goes on in a lot of places. I would bet there are people in this room that believe that that is how visiting should be linked to services. Hold on one second. I do want to just say, though, that all the research, all the clinical research says that frequent visiting that is meaningful, and meaningful does not necessarily mean you are sitting in a cramped office that hasn't been painted in 7 years, that might have roaches if you're in an urban environment, that might have old crummy toys, okay, that you don't want to play with anyway, all right? That's not meaningful. But meaningful visiting where a parent feels like they get to be the parent and a child feels like their parent gets to be their parent is the single best predictor of reunification and safe reunification, okay? I'm just going to tell you that we had to write some motion papers with clinical research in it, okay? We had to do that a few times. And I'm going to tell you the story of visiting in New York in a moment, but I agree with you, it should not be a reward. And mostly I agree with that because I represented children. And no matter what a parent has done, many children still want to have some contact. There are a small percentage of cases where kids do not want to see their parents, and even that changes over time. And then there's a big percentage of cases, huge. In most of your jurisdictions, I would bet it's well over 75%, where when I represented children, it was way over 90% of my clients. They wanted to see their family. They missed their house. They missed their routines. They didn't want to be with their foster parent necessarily on their birthday. I mean, this is why we struggle for kin placements that are really good, because it permits more visiting often, okay? There is all sorts of research that not only says it's the best predictor of safe reunification, but it is the best way for children to deal with the stressors of foster care, okay? It's the best way for them to have a connection where, you know, the parent is being appropriate in the visit. And again, not the kind of visits that most of us see happen. There's a lot of research, but if you don't believe me, then I would just point you to Pennsylvania's research, okay, which said back in 1999, over the past 3 decades, so now it's been 4 decades, longer, yeah, 4 decades, a growing body of research has soundly established several major findings related to visiting between children in foster care and their parents. Study findings indicate that frequent, regular visiting enhances children's emotional well-being and adjustment while in care, improves parents' positive feelings about the placement and decreases their worries about the children while they're in care, and is strongly correlated with achieving the placement outcome of reunification. And let me tell you something else. Remember what I said is the main question I think we're all trying to answer. If you work out a visiting plan that gives the parent a lot of contact with their child, a lot of contact around activities where they get to be the parent, like school shopping or haircuts or doctor's appointments or birthday parties or making meals, and they don't engage in services, guess what? You may have just helped to answer that question for yourself. Because good visiting is linked to quicker permanency outcomes across the board. So if you set up a great visiting plan, a parent's more likely to engage in services. And those of you who have children, I think, can imagine why. And those of you who have parents, okay, maybe not now, but when you were children, can imagine why. I know not all of us want to spend 4 days with our parents anymore, or 2 days even, but when we were kids, different, okay? So the research is there, and guess what? It's in the state of Pennsylvania, and you have all written about it, and it's supposed to be infusing your practices. And as a small adjustment, I encourage you to just designate one person in your planning team, or one person in your office, or a social work intern, or a legal intern, or a college intern, or your own teenage child when they're driving you crazy, to read this handbook. And then have a staff meeting or a brown bag lunch or something and say what's in it. Because there's a lot of good stuff that's been written in Pennsylvania about visiting that has certainly borne out my experiences with it. Yes?
All right, I want to talk about the visiting process. You say that it is healthy for kids to study. I have a child who's in care. The one part of the curriculum law, we have to see your child for an hour and a half. My judge is actually here and that's what she ordered. But it's strictly up to the foster agent to allow that to happen. There's been many times where my visits cut down to a half hour, to 15 minutes.
Can everybody hear this?
Some weeks,
Okay.
some weeks I didn't even get a visit, and I had no say in that.
Okay. What this very brave parent is saying, that she had a child in care, and the law, you said, is that it's an hour and a half, and that the agency gets to decide.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is important. This is important. Okay. The parent is, and ma'am, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but only because I have to keep pacing and get through this, but she said, sometimes my hour and a half visit got reduced to half an hour. Sometimes it got reduced to 15 minutes. Sometimes it didn't happen at all, okay? So when we're talking about our legal standards, this is important, and thank you for saying it because I should have said it. We have to be mindful of the fact that a lot of visits aren't kept, okay? And that children are penalized the same way parents are penalized. And you know what happens? And I'm sorry you couldn't hear it because I can. You know what happens when parents don't get their visits? They lose faith in this process. It doesn't seem like it has legitimacy or credibility. And I'm not talking about every parent, okay? We have plenty of parents at CFR who don't make it. But and I know this when I represented children, I knew there were plenty of parents who had never really been given a shot at continuing to parent as best they could while their child was in care. And we were at the end of the line, and there was nothing more to do because by then a child was bonded to a foster parent and had become psychologically and emotionally attached, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, okay? So everything that this woman is saying is true, and visiting is so linked to a parent's notion of whether this process really makes any sense, okay? Whenever possible, okay, we try to have visits take place outside of the agency. Whenever possible, we try to get them as frequent as we can. When we first started asking that infants be allowed to visit 3 or 4 times a week with their parents for 3 or 4 hours at a time, what do you think we were told? Because we said this is an infant. An infant can't go every 2 weeks, because that's the legal standard in New York, too, once every 2 weeks. You know, lots of pushback. There's no resources for that. Many, many caseworkers would say, you know what, if I had 5 cases, I would go to the park, I would go to the museum, I would go do birthday parties, I would do the whole thing, okay? How many of you are in a county where visits take place in the parent's home? Put your hand up really high. Okay, that's good when it can happen. That's great for a child when that can happen. I think you're going to be surprised to learn that this handbook that I'm talking about, which is very long, so it does take a long time to read, talks about the fact that whenever possible, visiting is supposed to take place in a parent's home. Visiting weekly should be viewed as the minimum frequency, okay, rather than the ideal or the standard, okay, and that visit frequency should reflect the needs of the children, and that means developmental needs, okay? A 15-year-old can talk to their parent on a cell phone, can interact with them less frequently than a little kid can, and we all know that, but we don't always ask ourselves if we've worked as hard as we could to try to make the visiting responsive to that. When we started to get pushback about things like that, frequent visits, then what we started to do was try to identify a visit host in our cases, okay? Here's another small adjustment. No matter what hat you wear, ask whether there is somebody who could be a visit host. It isn't always appropriate at the beginning of the case, but there usually is somebody that somebody can identify. A visit host in our practice is somebody identified by the parent or an older youth who can monitor visits, accompany the family on visits in lieu of the caseworker. Not all together, okay, not like the caseworker doesn't supervise any visits, but can go to the park, do school shopping, host a family dinner, et cetera, et cetera. I had the first visit host I ever worked on a case with, and we didn't call them visit hosts, back when I represented children. It was a long time ago. I was representing 2 girls on a sex abuse case, okay? Serious case. Sex abuse, their father was the alleged perpetrator, they were with their mom, okay? He was out of the home. I was in front of a incredibly no-nonsense judge, okay? And I am interviewing my clients, and I say to them, how are visits going, okay? How are visits going? And they say, oh, we don't want to visit at the agency anymore. We don't want to visit our dad at the agency anymore. So, you know, because I was like, I think the wise old age of 28 at the time, in my head, I'm right away saying to myself, oh, I'm going to do a motion to suspend his visits. You know, I mean, he is the bad guy anyway. I'm going to do a motion to suspend his visits, and I'll get an affidavit from the therapist, and I'll get my the kids' statements in there, and it'll be all the rage, and it'll be this great motion, and his visits will get suspended. That's what's going through my head as the kids are telling me this. And then, thank goodness, one of them said, we want to visit our dad at our church. That's what they said. And I said, why your church? And they said, well, because we have a lot of good memories of visiting our dad, of being with our dad at church. We have a lot of friends at our church. We still go to the church with our mom. But our dad used to go to church with us, and that was a place where we had a lot of fun. We played the piano after church was over. You know, we had donuts, the whole thing, okay? And I said, oh, you know, they did not want to visit. They wanted to not visit in an agency, okay? So what we did is we called the pastor, and we found out whether he was willing to stay after services in the church hall for an hour and a half, doing paperwork or whatever, off to the side. The church hall was about as big as half of this room, or this part of the room, while the girls visited with their dad, playing the piano, talking about school, whatever. And guess what he said? He said, sure, I don't know why, I've been a support to this family all along. I care about them. There's a lot of people like this in our families' lives, okay? Now, I went into court, not writing the motion I thought I was going to ask the judge to approve this pastor as a visit host, although we didn't call him that. And, the judge, I don't know about the judges in this room, but in New York City, we do have some judges who believe that if they see a person with their own eyes for the 11 minutes allotted for the proceeding, they will know, right here, if that person can be trusted, okay? I don't always agree with their assessments, but the point about a visit host is you often need to bring that person to the court, because if you're going to ask a judge to do this, you might need that person there. We have found we have to bring visit hosts to agencies, okay? We have to try to bring them to conferences. They're some of the people that are supposed to be supporting the family, okay? We ask every one of our clients if they can think of anybody who could help out with visits, hosting a dinner, whatever it is, okay? Guess what? Lots of visit hosts are mandated reporters. I don't know what your statute in Pennsylvania says, but I'm going to guess that guidance counselors and preschool teachers and doctors and early intervention therapists, that they're all people who would have to report something bad happening if something bad happened at a visit, okay? After that case, I had a case where a mother did homework with her child in an after-school program, and the guidance counselor was the visit host. Again, not all intrusive with the family, off to the side, okay? I had a case with a big sibling group that was separated, and there was a great aunt who couldn't have all those kids in foster care. She worked full-time. She couldn't have had any of them, but she said, I'll host a dinner every Sunday for all the kids and their mom. And their mom was a substance abuser. And everybody said, well, whoa, like, you know, what happens if the mom shows up? Hi, okay, what happens? She says, I'm not going to let her in, you know? And, you know, not everybody trusted that. We had to bring her into court. We had to execute, you know, we contract. When you're a social worker, you contract with clients sometimes. We had to contract with the mother and the great aunt. But I want to tell you that when that great aunt stood up in court and put up her hand next to the rest of us, and, you know, she was a very imposing woman. She came across with a tremendous amount of confidence. I don't think there was anybody in the room that doubted that she was going to be able to keep that mother from crossing the threshold if she was high. You know, she said, I threw her out every time she was high before, and I will do it again, okay? So there may be visit hosts in your cases, okay? You got to take risks with visit hosts, okay? That's what makes everybody uncomfortable. We've all lived through horrible, horrible events when you do child welfare, and those horrible events tend to stick with us big time, okay? So I ask you to think about a visit host in your cases, and if you ever want to draft guidelines, because that's what we ended up doing in New York City, we got a whole citywide task force together and we drafted guidelines, and the task force included children's services, family court judge, representatives of the family court judge, court attorneys and things like that, the department attorneys, the children's attorneys, the parents' attorneys. We did focus groups with foster parents, we did focus groups with youth. It took us 18 months. But we wrote guidelines because people said, I like this idea, but I'm a little worried about it. And some people were doing it on the sly. They were doing it on the sly, but they weren't necessarily telling their supervisor, like the caseworker who told me, it wasn't my case, about a young man whose dad was dying of AIDS and he was an alcoholic and he was never going to return to his father. But every Friday night, they bowled together. Every Friday night, they bowled together. And it was the bowling alley manager who said, they bowl in the lane next to me, I keep an eye on them, okay? And I only know about that because the caseworker said, you know, I'm actually doing this on a case, but I can't. We used to go out to foster care agencies and do focus groups, and they said, we need to know that this is approved. So if you ever want to know more about how we did that in New York City, I urge you to get in touch with me. I will send you our guidelines because now we can wave them around when we're in court, okay? Okay, the legal basis for Cornerstone advocacy, because I know we're all involved in a court process and you want to know if you're doing something legal, okay? Reasonable efforts language. It exists in your statutes, I think 6371, and I'll just go right to it in Pennsylvania, okay? 6373 and 6351, okay? And I think this is a no-brainer. The department has a legal obligation to exercise reasonable efforts to support and reunification and to safely get kids reunified. So some of the arguments we make are that a visit host is a reasonable effort in support of reunification. The caseworker would like the 3-year-old to have visits 3 times a week, but lacks the resources, okay? Lacks the resources. Any statutory section that is applicable to the particular thing you're arguing about. If it's services, you've got a statute right there. You don't have a visiting statute in Pennsylvania. I'm right about this, right? There's nothing in your statute about visiting, right? Right? Okay, that's a little bit of a design defect, but, okay. Luckily, you can argue that visiting is a reasonable effort in support of reunification, okay? Any applicable regulations, and in Pennsylvania, it's chapter 55 of your administrative code. You may all know this. However, I had to learn a lot about regulations when we started to make these arguments about culturally appropriate services, about visit hosts, about why the godparent should be the foster parent instead of the maternal grandmother, okay? We had to find out if there were things other than the statutes, which are sometimes very scant. And in Pennsylvania, you actually have a lot of regulations that speaks to these very issues. And so one other small adjustment is, oh, I got to give you one more on visiting, is just learn one. Learn one regulation. If you really like it, keep it on your desk, or in your briefcase or with your bench book, okay? Wherever you keep it. And then learn one policy guideline that you really like, okay? Your State Department, the Office of Youth and Family, what is it? What is it? OCYF, okay? They issue all sorts of policy guidelines and directives, okay? I have to thank Kathy for helping me figure out what they meant and where they were, okay? Just like New York State. And in where I practice, New York City also issues guidelines, okay? And you may have a county where there's also the county that issues guidelines, all right? Very important to read what these things say, because like the visiting handbook, that's usually where you're going to find all these best practices articulated. Now, policy guidelines and administrative directives are not necessarily law, the way statutes and regulations are, but they can be persuasive because they represent the executive branch's own interpretation of what they're supposed to be doing to support families, okay? And this is what it looks like in Pennsylvania. Now, I want to skip ahead, and I just want to show you a few things, okay, before we talk about some specifics, okay? I just want to show you, and this is in the materials, that in Pennsylvania, you have already got all of this great stuff. So if you're an advocate and you are trying to convince the judge or the department to do something for a parent or for a child, or if you're a judge and you're frustrated because the department is telling you we can't do that, we don't do that. This woman, who said the law is the agency has the discretion to decide, I didn't actually see that. But there's always this game of telephone tag that goes on. And when I represented foster care agencies, I became very aware of how important regulations were, because a worker would say to me, oh, we don't do that. Oh, no, we're not allowed to do that. And I'd be like, I don't see it anywhere in the law. Like it makes sense. Why can't we just figure out a way to do it? And it's because what they were talking about was in regulations, but there's a game of telephone tag that goes on. So what comes out and what gets interpreted is not always what the regulation says, okay? But you've got a lot of good regulations there. I already talked about this one about children's placement and proximity, okay? Services, Pennsylvania Child Welfare Values and Principles, which is very recent. Pursuing cultural competence for our work with children, youth, and families, okay? Some things about conferencing, all right? All challenges have solutions grounded in family and community strengths. Your Honor, I am asking that Ms. Jones be allowed to bring her pastor to the first set of agency meetings and to any formal conference. I'm arguing that her ability to productively engage in that conference is a reasonable effort in support of reunification. And you know what? The state of Pennsylvania has articulated as a best practice that all challenges have solutions grounded in family strengths, okay? Now, I appear in front of some judges that say, I am not interested in what a bunch of social workers have come up with in a room, okay? But if there's a regulation and there's a statute, and then I can also bring in a policy directive, then I get a little more attention, okay? And nobody wants to be the person in the room who says, I'm not interested in best practices. I'm not, Everybody's interested in them, but we don't always have the resources to make them happen. Okay, so learn a regulation or learn a guideline, okay? Oh, this is the one I wanted to tell you about visiting, okay? Great project for a college intern, social work intern. If you live in a community where high school students have to get community service hours, which didn't happen when I was in high school, but now I hear is all the rage, call up a guidance counselor at the high school and say, I need a student for 5 hours. I want them to create a list of everything in the surrounding community that's free for families. So whether it's street fairs or whether it's a museum or whatever it is, it's a YMCA, whatever it is, okay? Great project for an intern, okay? If you have the luxury of having legal interns, let them go through the administrative code, because it's a pain to go through it and highlight some things for you, okay? Even the visiting handbook, the visitation handbook from 1999, though it is ostensibly about visiting, has a ton to say about these other things, conferences, services, etc., and I've got it all there for you, okay? Here, visiting, okay? You've got your regulation that you all knew about, okay? The agency is supposed to schedule makeup visits, okay? It doesn't always happen. If you're the advocates, you're going to have to be the ones that make sure it happens. If you're the judges, you're going to have to be the ones that make sure it happens. Parents won't always know what is supposed to be going on, okay? The visitation handbook, I read you some of these research findings, okay? You've got it in all your materials. But creative visiting plans that reflect attention to the family's tradition, culture, and ways of celebrating milestones such as birthdays, okay? Creative plans acknowledge the broad range of activities that parents and children might participate in together, okay? So ask your clients, okay? And if you've got the caseworker in front of you on the record, ask the caseworker if they've asked the family about some things they would like to do when they visit together. You can't promise you'll be able to make it happen, but ask about it, okay? I don't know how many of you represent children because I don't remember exactly who raised their hand, and I don't have my glasses on in terms of distance because I have to be able to read this, but a lot of us don't like to talk to kids about something like, what did you like to do with your mom? We don't. And we don't necessarily say, like, well, if you didn't have to be at the agency, what would you want to be doing? You know, what would you want to be doing? You know, I can't promise it's going to happen, but what would you want to be doing? And kids have a lot to say about that. And it was only that visit host experience that made me start to ask kids about where would they want to visit if they could, who else would be at the visit, who makes them feel safe when they're with their mom or dad. And we don't like to ask kids those questions, why? Why don't we want to ask them? Or why don't we want to ask parents those questions? Why? Because? It has to be one of you because I can't hear anybody else. Why don't we want to ask?
Don't want to get their hopes up.
Don't want to get their hopes up, and what else? How might they react? They start crying, okay? They're sad, and it's hard. You already feel like, oh my God, I don't have enough resources, I don't get paid enough, some days I don't even have legal pads, the computer breaks down, you know, the department's changing the casework system every 10 minutes, okay, the whole thing. They're sad. Families separated by foster care are sad. And, you know, one thing you can all do as a small adjustment, in whatever grouping you have, is just to have one meeting every 3 months where you just talk about things you've done on your cases around visiting. And just swap ideas, okay? Just a brown bag, okay? 4 times a year, have a brown bag. And then also ask yourself, I'm a very seasoned professional. We're very seasoned professionals. Do we need a little help learning how to talk about this with clients? We talk about this with clients. And you know what? They cry. They cry when we say, what would you like to do if you could? If you could. What did you used to do on his birthday? What did you used to do after school? Okay, they do. They cry. But you know what? Then we know what we're trying to make happen in terms of a visiting plan, and it's hard to do. Right there, you've got the YMCA. They even mention it in your Pennsylvania policy guidelines, okay? It talks about parents being in the parenting role. Very important to them staying engaged, okay? I was looking for something about resources, but I'll get back to it. Okay, I want to just show you what this looks like in Pennsylvania in terms of this architecture that I talked about before, okay? This is the architecture. Now, if you're an attorney or you're a judge, you want to know about this, but I'm not saying that in every case we illuminate all these steps, but we're ready to if we need to. If we do a written motion, we write all this out. If it's just an oral application, it's a little bit different. Okay, so here it is, all right? Application for a child to be placed with a godparent, all right? You've got a section about finding placement for children out of care. You've got a regulation that says a child's placement is supposed to take into account proximity to school. You've got an OCYF bulletin, okay, that says a kinship foster parent can be anybody with a positive relationship to a child. They don't have to be related. And then you've got this Pennsylvania Child Welfare Values and Principles that says, we will maintain and promote lifelong connections. We believe every community has strengths and resources for children, youth, and families. It isn't just their relatives. It's not just their kin. These people might be in their community. Basketball coaches, teachers, adult parents of other friends, okay? Especially for older youth, all right? You have it, so I'm not going to go through it. Application for a visit host, okay? For a visit host, again, there is some basis in law for this in Pennsylvania, and certainly in terms of policy statements. Right there, it's acknowledged that one of the main barriers is that we don't have enough resources, okay? So if you want to do something and you don't have enough resources, a visit host is a good place to start. Not on every case, but in a lot of cases. Last thing I'd say, okay, back to this question about how do we figure this out, all right? Who can parent safely and who can't? What I feel like we've learned over the last 7 years at CFR, 8 years at CFR, is that if we pay attention to these 4 cornerstones, we answer that question more accurately. Not every parent in our caseload makes it. less than half of our kids go into care in the first instance. You saw what some of our results were. Kids come home more quickly. Foster care is not a picnic, as evidenced by the panelists that preceded me, and whose shoes I would never want to have to walk in. But at the end of the day, when you think about the things that stick in the pit of your stomach, a lot of times it's the lost opportunities. Sometimes we're really sure we've done the right things. Sometimes we're not. And this approach, we think, in terms of our staff, helps them know that if they gave this their all and they focused on it at every conference, at every court appearance, in every meeting for supervision with their supervisor, then we are going to adequately separate the parents who can do it from the parents who can't. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think that's what we all want to do, and it's very, very difficult to do. And, you know, just in terms of these panelists, if we are going to sentence them to, or, you know, through our own lack of energy or resources or whatever, if they're going to end up like this, if we took away or made it less likely that they had a shot at being with their parent, we at least want to have been right. So I urge you to get in touch with me. Stephanie knows how to get in touch with me. It sounds like you've been very busy and you're doing a lot of great work. Thank you very much.